acid. Oh.
All right. All right, everybody. We've got another episode here. We got two bands that everyone loves to hate. We got Creed's My Own Prison versus Nickelback's The State. And so this is Creed's debut record. This is Nickelback's sophomore album. And yeah, we're going to duke out these two records. Do you want to, maybe I'll start first, Jeff. I'll just kind of give my summation of the timeline of this kind of post-grunge rock and kind of how it sort of came up.
Jimmy, what we need right now is a little context.
Context. There it is. So, okay, so I would say the late 80s, early 90s was extremely fertile musical ground for rock and roll. You had the sort of post-hair metal bands that were doing the kind of 70s sleaze rock, like Guns N' Roses, Faster Pussycat, you know, all those guys, right? And then the Seattle grunge thing kind of snuck in, and then it just became this huge, massive, like tsunami that just wiped out 80s rock. And but then around, I remember where I was. I was in my mom's car. We were going to a guitar lesson, and we've heard on the radio that Kurt Cobain committed suicide, right? So right away, I think that moment, I mean, it is kind of like the John Lennon assassination or the Elvis death.
Of our generation.
It absolutely was, yeah. You could say that that day was the day that grunge, that was the beginning of the end for grunge, right? And so Nirvana was gone. They broke up, and Alice in Chains was struggling with their self-titled release that came out in '96. Soundgarden had a pretty good,
by far their worst album.
Yep. Soundgarden had a fairly good release, Down on the Upside, which I like, but it was definitely not as influential as the last two records. And same with Pearl Jam. I mean, Pearl Jam, had some decent songs on Vitalogy and No Code, but it was a marked step down commercially. And I like those two albums now, but at the time I hated them. I think
I personally think that pretty much they tripped on the stairs with No Code.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was a bump on the sidewalk, and they went ass over tea kettle, if you ask me. But that's for another argument.
There you go. Fair enough. Yeah. I mean, that definitely was the universal consensus for sure. And and then there was all this other, it was almost like, so when grunge kind of left, there was this giant void of all these other styles of music flooding in. You had hip hop was like exploding. You had like electronica was exploding. You had, pop was getting big, like Britney Spears and all these pop bands.
The Spice Girls,
Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. I mean, the indie rock thing was starting to creep in. So there was this giant void of no rock and roll, right? Like rock had kind of gone away. So I think there was a void happening. And I think bands like Nickelback and Creed, they were able to craft songs that were very radio friendly and radio compatible. And that really propelled them into the mainstream. But the only issue with these two bands, I find, is that there wasn't any groundbreaking material with their music. Like they became big because of the void. They didn't become big because they were pushing something new. Because usually rock and roll is this thing that, this new style comes and it's a reaction to the last style that happened, But I think with Creed and Nickelback, in my own opinion, I feel that they were big because there just wasn't anyone else around. And they had the help of rock radio that needed material badly. That's my opinion. So these bands write good songs. They work hard. Obviously you can hear it. They're both well practiced. But I would agree with the critical consensus that they aren't revolutionary in their sound. They're very.
I was also going to say, Jimmy, that they can play and sing.
Yep.
People hate their singers. They take a lot of shit.
Yep.
Both those guys can sing really well,
Yep.
and they can play really well. The guitar playing is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. They're great players.
and there's one thing I want to say that I think we take for granted. Like you and I grew up in this, or I mean, I was grown at that point. I was an adult when these records came out. So when when I share my head up high. So like that is to precurse this, I'm gonna say I played my son's mom hates Nickelback. One sec, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
She hates Nickelback. And the reason why is because she hates the guy's voice. So
Okay.
Chad Kruger has a distinct voice. It's got a lot of it's whiskey soaked. It's got a lot of it's scratchy, maybe a little abrasive, you could call it. And Scott Stapp has that drawl. So these guys are distinct vocalists, and because I grew up with this on rock radio, it's normal for me.
Yeah.
But my son thinks it's weird, and there's a lot of other strange vocalists in that time. He said the same thing about Alanis Morissette.
Hmm.
Now, again,
Yeah.
we grew up with that on the radio. It's normal to us, but when you put it in the context of all the other bands out there and all the other singers, it is strange. It's different, and
Mm-hmm.
it to me, it's like the equivalent for me is listening to now like current hip hop with like mumble voice people and all that shit. Like that is normal now. So it's nothing to the younger generation. They think that that is the norm, whereas it's an anomaly to me. It sounds strange and incongruent with the music that I grew up with.
Yep.
So I think Nickelback and Creed are victims in a sense of they're just you're right. They kind of continued on with what was with the sound that they knew and loved. They kind of did it their way, which was just a little different. But they're just the way they do things, the way they sing. Uh, it caught a lot of flack from, and like you said, they're the bands that people love to hate, which I think is a little unfounded.
Yeah.
And I've been guilty of it too. I've been guilty of perpetrating it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
However, today we are judging these albums on their own merits.
Yep. Yep.
And also one other thing that I wanted to point out, the one thing that I remember from this era is I remember there was very much a swing of rock being like it was hard again or aggressive and like low end and punchy and heavy guitars. Very much a swing into that neck of the woods. And I remember that there wasn't a lot in the way of other bands. I mean, Coldplay came out in like '99, and that was like maybe the one exception to the rule to me. Like, and they were the to me they were the critical darlings of the music industry. I mean, everybody was talking about them. Every single music magazine was all up on Coldplay, but really the scene was, Creed, Nickelback, Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Linkin Park, and all those bands, and they certainly had an aggressive, very very heavy guitar sound to them. So these guys, to me, they were. I mean, I guess we could have gone with Korn's first album with the rest of these. They would have fit in just fine, and Linkin Park's and all that, but we did choose these two. Anyways.
Yeah. I mean, that could be another good show. I mean, I would classify Limp Bizkit, Korn, Deftones, Linkin Park. I classify that as new metal. I think that would be the term for that. Whereas, they're a little bit more in the metal camp, whereas these guys, Creed and Nickelback, are a little bit more in the rock camp. But you are right though that these albums are pretty heavy. Like there is a lot of down. It sounds like the down tuned guitars, and they're and the riffs are pretty metally too, right? So, but it's almost like kind of dances on that line of rock and metal. I would call it hard rock still. I wouldn't call Creed metal.
I would call it hard rock as well, but to be honest, a lot of people, I would consider Alice in Chains hard rock.
That's
Some people
true.
call them heavy metal,
That's
but
true.
I hear a lot of Alice in Chains in Creed, to be perfectly honest.
I was gonna say that too. I think Scott's he sounds the most like Lane. Absolutely. It's I mean like Eddie Vedder kind of gets the I guess it's like he sounds like Eddie Vedder. It's kind of like Stone Temple Pilots first album, right? But yeah, you're right. I think Alice in Chains is kind of the Creed prototype for sure. It's rocky, but it's got metal tones to it for sure. Yeah.
And the Alice in Chains sound is something that was maybe not created in the studio. Like, I don't know if they went out and they're like, hey, let's just do these weird vocal harmonies. Or maybe that was a conscious decision that they did, but that was their thing, whatever.
Yeah.
That was certainly the thing that they did that other people didn't. That is like that. When I think of Alice in Chains, that's what makes those weird vocal harmonies between if it's not Jerry Cantrell and Lane Staley, it's that them just manipulating Lane Staley's vocals.
Mm-hmm.
And that's I hear a lot of that. It's all over this My Own Prison record, and quite frankly, I really like it. That's one thing I really like about Alice in Chains.
Yep.
Anyways, Jimmy, I think it's about time we get down to business, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think you should go first though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, to start this off, in 1997, I would have been so that's the year Creed came out with My Own Prison.
Yep.
I remember I would have been 19, so a very impressionable young man. I
Mm-hmm.
was still pure hip hop with a sprinkling of Oasis at the time. So
Just a big sprinkle.
yeah, I wasn't a fan of rock music yet, but I remember hearing My Own Prison on the radio, and I remember Torn, and I remember thinking that's different and I like it. But then it was the next year, and I remember the song I really liked was One. And that was like the least um it got the least radio play out of the big songs on that album, but it was the one I liked best. It was the one that really stuck out to me. Um and it was one of the things now it again I was still pretty much all hip hop, but it was one of the things that really started me thinking that that there's more to rock and roll for me than just Oasis.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I do have fond memories of My Own Prison. I did get it in 1998. Um, and again, I liked the big songs. I didn't like the other songs. I didn't find them as accessible. The label did a good job. They pumped the songs that went on the radio were the right ones.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I'm an adult though, and I can look back and I can judge it for what it is, it's a very good album. There are no duds whatsoever on this one.
Yeah.
Torn is a really good album opener. The song "My Own Prison" is very good.
Yep.
"Pity for a Dime," um, "Unforgiven," "Illusions," the one I would say I like the least.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of, I mean, it's tight. It's 10 songs. I like every one of them. With the again, I don't mind Illusions. I just think that was to me that's the one that it would be on the lesser end of things. Great closer with One though. One brings it all together at the very end. Um, Another reason why these guys catch a lot of flack is there is a very heavy Christian undertone to this album. A lot of you can definitely tell that there's a lot of the lyrics are about spirituality and the conflict of living in a modern day society, but being a devout Catholic or Christian, and how the sensibility his sensibilities are just conflicted based on his own upbringing. And Scott Stapp's later, I learned that his stepfather, sorry, was a minister.
Okay.
So I think he had some big shoes to fill. And coming up in Florida, that's where Creed are from. I mean, certainly the ladies aren't wearing a hell of a lot in Florida, if you know what I'm saying. And it would just be difficult to, I mean, in 1997, I was 19, and I certainly, I wasn't religious at all, but I mean, I know the pressures of growing up and this and that, and you know, being sinful and anyway, I quite like the especially maybe now that I'm a bit older and I am kind of wrestling with some of these issues, uh, of trying to be a better man and this and that, and so it's. I think it worked then. It worked now. It works now. Uh, and I gotta say, the sound of the record holds up to me. It doesn't sound dated at all. Like I can very much remember being in 1997 and hearing this, but to me, it still sounds. The production value, I think, is very much. Uh, I don't think it sounds old or hackneyed or crappy now that times have progressed. I think it still sounds great. So that's my rating for My Own Prison. Now, The State, particularly, I absolutely love this album. Again, 10 tracks, 10 tracks long, with an acoustic version of Leader of Men. Every song is a winner. Uh, we're going 10 for 10 here. Again, there's one song, Hold Out Your Hand, which I would consider to be the lesser of the 10 here. But I love Cowboy Hat. The album starts off really strong with Breathe. Um, Worthy to Say, Digging This. The songs that plenty, again, same. There were 4 songs that made the radio on this: Breathe, Leader of Men, Old Enough, and Worthy to Say. I like every one of them. I'm gonna say I have a stronger connection to The State because the album came out in '99 and it was their second album, but it was their major label debut. And their first album most definitely sounds much more like a demo album or a demo tape to me. The production is far weaker. The songs don't nearly have as much cohesion. The Yeah, and the production is definitely a step down from The State. But I bought this album in Christmas of 2000, so it was Nickelback's current album. But I just remember at the time that I remember that Coldplay was like the band that was on everybody's mind, and whether it just happened to be the music I was buying or that was the state of the music industry at that time. I just remember things seemed a bit soft to me, and The State was a breath of fresh air. It was just a kick-ass rock album that came out. These guys were just a bunch of guys. They were a great bar band. They were trying to make it. They were hungry. And actually, I think that February or January, I saw Nickelback open for Everclear, which
Oh,
shows
cool.
you how they were coming up at the time. Like, and Everclear were past their prime.
Hmm.
Like Everclear's peak would have been probably 97, 98 with Santa Monica, or am I thinking of the right song?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. That's it.
But seeing as how Nickelback opened for them, and they played the Cool House, which was, we're talking a 2,000 seater, like a general admission type venue. So, um, but to me, there's a cohesion between these two albums. They sound like two bands that are hungry, two
Absolutely.
bands that are on the way up, two
Yep.
bands where there's maybe better things to come from them in the future. Uh, I personally think that these are my 2 favorite albums for both these bands. I'm gonna go with The State because we're saying which one we like better, and um, I just personally like the State better.
Okay.
I think they're both equal, though. To be perfectly honest, I have a stronger connection to the State just because by 2000, I was tired of hip hop. I felt that it had betrayed me, and I was exploring rock and roll full swing. And I wasn't quite ready to commit when My Own Prison came out, even though My Own Prison was one of the albums that really started me on my journey to liking rock and roll music. Uh, I like both of these albums very much to this day. I listen to them, maybe not so often, but I do very much like both of them. I think they're both awesome. Still, my vote is for the State. What say you, Mr. Wolf?
All right. Um, yeah. So I agree with everything that you said. For me, um, I remember seeing Nickelback on Much Music. It was the band that was kind of always in the background. You would just kind of always see them. They got a lot of push back in the late '90s, but they weren't really big. They were it was kind of like they were like the you had a feeling that they were Canadian though, because
They
I
were on
only,
the peripheral.
yeah, they were, and I only saw them on Much. Like I didn't really hear them much on the radio. Uh, but but yeah, I mean, listening to these albums, yeah, both bands are very tight. Like they're like I would say they are bands where you'd walk into a club or a bar and you'd see them and you'd be like, holy shit, that's a great band. Like it would blow you away seeing them live in a small club, just how tight they are and how tight they both sound. Um, but yeah, I think my issue with both of them, and especially with Nickelback, is I don't get a sense of I find that the creative force is limited. I don't get this sense that Nickelback is breaking any new ground. Um, you know, when I think of bands around that time, I was definitely more excited with like Deftones and Korn and even Limp Bizkit and even you know, I mean, like people love to hate Limp Bizkit too, right? But yeah, and even Linkin Park. I just felt like there was just it was newer. It was different. There was a little bit more brimming there. I with Nickelback, it did feel like a really good bar band to me, and I you know, but I do have to say though, in hindsight, the songs are very well written. The songs are great. Same with Creed, great songs. But yeah, with both bands, I kind of understand. I don't understand the hate. Maybe it's just because the bands were so big. It's kind of like when they're in your face like that. You're like maybe at times you're forced to judge them, you know, and if you don't like it, you kind of give a harsh or rash judgment when it's you know it might not be warranted at that time. Um, but hearing it now, and I mean, I was kind of in the middle. I remember I did do a Nickelback deep dive about 10 years ago. I was like, okay, I have to get well versed with this band because they're just so big. I have to know who they are. I remember liking The Long Run a lot. That was a really heavy record. Um,
The Long Road.
the Long Road. Yeah, The Long Runs is an Eagles record. Uh, and the next album was that was their big album. It was the for all the right reasons. Was that the next one?
That was the one after that, but
All
Silver
the right
Side
reasons.
Up was the big one though, no? With How You Remind Me. That was the one that was the
That
massive one.
okay, that was massive too, but their biggest one was All the Right Reasons.
You're kidding.
Yeah,
Wow, I
yeah,
wouldn't have thought that. But
yeah. Uh, I mean, I think so. Silver Side Up. That was so. Yeah, that was their massive breakout. That was I think that was Diamond. That was huge, or at least close to Diamond. But yeah, for all the right reasons, that was 18. That was 18 times platinum.
wow, I had no idea.
Yeah. So I actually prefer those later records because I think the production definitely improved. They got Joey Moy, who's kind of one of the main country producers now. So yeah, they met Joey Moy for Silver Side Up, so that's the huge increase in production value there. Um, yeah, so yeah, the Creed album is very low budget. I think they only spent like a few $1,000s on the recordings. It sounds like
Well,
a very low budget recording.
the Creed. So My Own Prison. They basically I heard that they made the album in Florida. It cost them $6,000,
Yep.
but then they got picked up by Wind Up Records, who signed them because they were popular in Florida, and they were filling out big places, fairly big bars, and Wind Up came to see them, and the president and the A&R man flew down to see them, and the president liked Scott Stapp's vocal and the
Okay.
guitar playing, and he said, "You know, we should sign these guys right away." Obviously, they have a fan base already; it's a no brainer.
Yeah.
So they re-recorded the album, but it was the album that was already done. Like I don't think they wrote any new songs for it. They
Okay.
just
So
re-recorded it.
it
So,
was a re-record then. Okay. Okay.
but it was a re-recording with like they did it in a nicer studio with a better producer and like better equipment and
Okay. That makes a
so
bit more
it's
sense.
not like the demo version of the album that was the $6,000 version. It was the one we hear is the one that Wind Up specifically
Okay.
produced, which was
Okay.
you know better.
Better. Yeah.
And to me, it doesn't sound when you say there's a huge production jump from the state, like in terms of Nickelback from the state, I can certainly hear the jump up in both albums from the state to Silver Side Up and My Own Prison to what's the next Creed one? Human Clay.
Clay. Yeah.
Huge. Um, but and to be honest, I liked both those albums. I bought them both right. I bought them both the day they came. Well, the week they came out, anyway. But to me, these ones I like better. And you know what? To be honest, like you said, the long run I bought, and for all the right reasons, I have that one too.
Mhm.
Um, if we're gonna, I feel like with Nickelback, I kind of feel like I mean, they're having more fun on the later records. They're a little more tongue in cheek, a little less. Maybe they're taking themselves less serious. Album like to me, the state, although it's not their debut, it was their. They finally got a little bit of money behind them. They're going to give it their best. They did. They kept everything serious. There's no fucking jokes on those albums. There's no talking about stains on dresses and
Yeah.
there's serious subject matter. I mean, on the state, I can think of one last run about maybe their buddies are going out of town on a big drug mission, or I can there's a sense of seriousness about it that I think maybe is lacking on and maybe not lacking is not the right word, but because those other albums have very serious songs too. Like Photograph is sentimental and nostalgic, and they're I mean Chad Kruger is it's not a joke to him. He is being very serious, and even though he's talking about breaking into his high school, like those are fond memories of him looking back at his misspent youth, and I don't know. I just find them a little more serious on this album. They know that this is their break. They know that this is their one chance. They're not going to get another chance like this. They fuck up on the state, there won't be another album for them. Whereas, once they did Silver Side Up, they knew that there was another album coming, and they could maybe not rest on their laurels, but they could relax a little. They could have a little more fun. They could maybe even experiment in the studio a bit more, and maybe you could even say let a little more of their true selves, uh, you know, shine on the record. Whereas on the earlier days, they're just going to keep it bare bones and keep the songwriting as maybe as serious as they could, or as you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And with when it comes to Creed, I don't think there was any change at all. I think every album was just a natural progression in terms of the songwriting. With Arms Wide Open is about Scott Stapp finding out he's going to be a father, more struggles. In fact, I think with the second album, it was even more apparent that he's maybe struggling with fame and maybe the larger audience that he feels a need that he has to be the not the icon, but he needs to be the role model that because he's now been put in that position. So, anyways, I just think
Yeah,
things are simpler back on these two records. You know, these are
yeah,
just a bunch of young guys trying to make it on the scene,
for sure.
and
Yeah, yeah.
you
Well,
know,
and I mean, yeah, they definitely and with Mark Tremonti, the guitar player for Creed, he formed a whole bunch of other bands too. He did Alter Bridge and his a band called Tremonti too, right? So you can tell that these guys work really hard, and yeah, they did kind of fall into that rock star trap. I think well with Creed it was kind of the dark side of being a rock star where you're kind of yeah, you're just depressed and drinking and self-loathing. Whereas I think Nickelback kind of went the other direction, where they just kind of had fun with their fame and they partied, but they partied. They were happy when they partied. That's like the vibe that I got from both bands. But they both, you know, took both ends of that seriously. Like they Creed really got dark and Nickelback really had fun. That's I don't know. That's kind of the vibe I get. They're yeah,
Nickelback
they
spent an awful lot of money buying things and cars and stuff,
yeah,
and Scott Stapp bought a lot of alcohol.
he did. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so if I'm pitting these records together, uh, I think yeah, I'm gonna go the other way. I think I resonate with the Creed album a little more. Um, I
Jimmy, so you're not torn at all between these two?
yeah, this one resonated a little bit more with me. I yeah, just a little more. I Nickelback. The frustrating thing I always have with Nickelback is I always feel like they come in with their songs with a really cool riff, but the riff is never really developed. It's almost like the riff comes in and then Chad takes over with his song,
Mm.
and it's a good song, but the kind of the heavy riff rocky thing kind of takes a back seat. Creed's riffs are a little bit more up front. So I think there's a bit of a better balance there.
I think you could also say too that that's because I think Creed is a band, but more so the partnership between Tremonti
That's it.
and Scott Stapp,
That's
whereas Nickelback is clearly Chad Kruger's band.
for sure.
Chad Kruger's the lead guitar player, and I think the lead singer, and I think he's the songwriter. Like he's the one man show, and the other guys are it's Chad's band, whereas Creed is a unit,
Yeah,
and so there's the guitar playing and the vocal, they both share the stage, whereas
yeah, I like that. Yeah, and
Chad's
it's
the front man.
and I mean, as much as as much as we can kind of criticize Scott's voice for being a little too grunge sounding, his voice does fit. It's not quite as overbearing as I find Chad's voice. I mean, Chad's voice is great, but after several songs, I mean, it's right there the whole time, right? It's Chad the whole time, and it gets a little grating for me too. I like Nickelback for maybe 3 or 4 songs. Creed, I can take a lot longer. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna give this one to Creed. I also like the album cover on the Creed album
Yes.
better. I think it's just more just fits into the music better. I think the state looks pretty cheap. Um,
Yeah.
it just kind of looks thrown together. Also,
Also,
this
it also reminds me of almost kind of like a half-assed Creed cover. It's like
yeah, it looks
that's
like
a
a
really
bad
cool
Creed
looking
cover.
picture.
Yeah,
Why don't we do something like that, but with a kid, and maybe throw him in a prison?
yeah. I also
You
hate
know?
the name Nickelback too. I think it's a
Yeah.
bad name. I don't like the state. It's kind of a confusing name too. So for me, I think the album just the presentation of the Creed album is better to me. Um, but
I
yeah,
also
but
think
I
it's interesting to note too. Remember how I said that they recorded the $6,000 My Own Prison?
yep.
That was actually the cover of the original album. Like
Interesting.
the
Okay.
cover for their original album was the same. Their logo was a bit different, but
Okay.
like that was the art direction from the original. And they liked it so much, they're just like, no, 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 we don't want you to change it. We want you to just go with it again.
Okay.
And the label acquiesced.
Cool.
But anyways, I'm glad you think that you like the Creed album more, Jimmy, because we will be going to see them November 27th.
We are gonna go see them.
We are now.
That's amazing. Looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So it's a tie.
It is a tiebreaker.
State versus my own prison.
We can't be unanimous every time, Jimmy. We gotta mix it up a little now and again, right?
Yeah,
We got to keep the audience guessing.
absolutely. Yeah, for
Got to
sure.
keep everybody on their toes.
And they could pick sides too. You know, they could. The Creed camp could kind of settle with me, and you can go with the Nickelback crew, or we can just both be,
And
hated
all the Nickels
like the
can have
band.
my back.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, Jeff. Yeah, that was a good one. So yeah, we'll it's gonna be good. So we will see you next week with a surprise. It will probably be an album battle, but yeah.
I await with bated breath, Jimmy.
All right. See you guys.